John Massara, thank you very much for coming in.
It's a pleasure.
All right, so why don't let's go back and sort of talk about the building of Arrowfield, and this podcast is based on the horses that built Arrowfield. So if we can go way back, you were a stockbroker. We're talking, this is in the 1980s?
Yep.
Was this before the 87 crash?
Yep.
And how did the 87 crash treat you?
Poorly, like everybody else. It's always worse than you think it's going to be, which has turned me into a very conservative fellow these days.
Right. And then when was the actual time when you thought, I want to get into this professionally and I want to start breeding professionally?
In a really sort of significant way, 1983, 84, 85.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And we regard Arrowfield as having been established in 1985.
1985.
Yeah.
So if we move to the first significant thing that Arrowfield did, which was investing in Danehill, and it's a long, fascinating story, but I'll try and move it along a little bit. But essentially, you came to terms with Coolmore to have equal share in Danehill.
I went to Europe to buy Danehill.
Uh-huh.
We identified him as a stallion prospect from here.
And was he a really hot prospect, or not many people had?
No, not many people thought he was a hot prospect because he was a son of Danzig, and Danzig was a son of Northern Dancer, who was the greatest sire around at the time and probably one of the greatest of all time. Well, we identified him as a target, and when he won his Group 1, the Ladbroke Sprint Cup, we flew over to negotiate the purchase. We'd been in touch with the owners. And while I was there, Robert Sangster, who I knew well, and said, you must go and see Coolmore Stud because they're doing interesting things over there and you're doing interesting things over here. You might be able to get together and perhaps shuttle horses.
Were they starting out as well, or had they been well established?
More established than I was.
Yeah.
In the middle of these negotiations, I slipped across to Ireland, and the last thing that happened was John Magna, the owner, part owner at the time, but owner since, said, are you looking at anything at the moment? And I thought to myself, I didn't have a long time to think. I thought to myself, will I tell him or won't I tell him? I thought, yeah, I might as well tell him. We're going to be honest with each other if we might do some business in the future. So I said, I'm looking at a horse called Danehill. Well, most of them at the table didn't know who Danehill was because he wasn't by a fashionable sire in Europe at the time. And then they rang up and said, well, we wouldn't mind coming in with you.
Yeah.
And that's how the thing was established.
Yeah.
So we bought the horse and we agreed that we would shuttle back and forth. And with me was Dr. Percy Sykes, who's a genius in his own right and a famous vet. And he was a very close friend of mine and treated me a bit like a son. He was quite a bit older than me. And he was on the board of Arrowfield. And I took him over with me when we went. And I said, Percy, this shuttling business, what do you think? He said, well, look, there hasn't been a lot of experience with it. Nelson Bunker Hunt did it with New Zealand, a couple of horses with New Zealand. We don't know how the horses will react to shuttling back and forth. But what we should do is after 3 or 4 years, we should stop and have a look and see how it's going and, talk to each other and make a decision as to whether we continue or not, sort of thing. So anyway, we went to about 5 years and I then said to them, look, this horse is doing massive things down here. He went off here earlier than he did in Europe.
Yes.
We backed him with some of our better mares.
And so he was starting to throw.
First crop, he started doing it.
Yep.
So I said by next year it'll have 6 double years. I think at that point, I reckon we should give him a rest, either here or there, wherever he's more successful. And the 6th year came along and they wanted to continue, keep shuttling. And I thought, well, we agreed last year we'd give him a rest. I'm not moving him. Anyway, cut a long story short, we got into a dispute over it. I just wanted to take the safe road. They thought there was no reason to. And so we ended up having to come do a private auction to get through it. I thought, the pressure's coming on. I'll see if I can work this out. And came out with this idea, which is a mad idea, that we should have a Dutch auction,
And just
a Dutch auction is a good idea.
And John Magny is one of the richest men in the world, right? So you say let's take on the richest man in the world in a Dutch auction, okay?
Yeah, and never get into a Dutch auction unless you've got more money than the other guy.
Yeah.
Okay, that's another rule that I've learned, which I haven't had to use subsequently.
Take note, everyone.
We used Sir Lawrence Street, who was, an eminent judge, as a sort of middleman. Sir Lawrence said, you must both tell me your financial capacity in terms of this auction.
No credit.
No credit allowed here. I want to know that it's going to get settled. So I went and begged, borrowed, did everything I could, called in a few mates and my bank and everybody.
Fatten the bank account up. Yeah.
We put together about equivalent to 23 million, which I thought I'd never have to use, but in case. But I never in my wildest dreams thought they'd go beyond $15 million.
So you thought we'll get it, you were going to go to 15?
Yeah.
And you thought we'll get him for sure?
Yeah. You know, and I kept going, they kept going. We got to 23 and Sir Lawrence said, you've got one more shot, John. So we put in one more bid and then they came straight back on top of it and I was out of cash,
and that was
out of gas.
So you would have been incredibly downcast, I presume?
Well, I walked back to the Arrowfield office from Sir Lawrence Street's rooms, which I think were in Macquarie Street, if my memory serves me right. And I said, we've lost the Holy Grail here.
Right.
It was a turning point in my life, Rich. I thought, you know what, this might be a sign that I should get out here. That's how shattered I was.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, and there were a few months while I thought that way, and then I thought, no, I'm not going to cop this. I'm going to fight back. And I took the view that if he was going to be the dominant stallion that I thought he was going to be, then his sons could probably be stallion prospects too. I would go about collecting his best 2 or 3 sons, early sons.
Mm. All right, so let's move on to Redoute's Choice, which is obviously, you know, what's given Arrowfield so much success certainly over the last sort of 20 years or so. So I was doing my research and bringing myself back up to speed on Redoute's Choice, and it won a Group 1 in its second start. My first question is, how much did you know about Redoute's Choice before it had even raced?
I knew a fair bit. I'll tell you why. Because, first of all, I was the underbidder on his mother. But when it came to mate her, Mr. Yassine got David Moody, I think it was, at the time, to ring me to try and get her into Danehill. Danehill was pretty full at the time. And they said, is there any chance we can get the mare into Danehill? I said, well, gee, it's a bit late in the year, but look, I'll find a way of fitting her in. Mm-hmm. So we fitted her in. So that's my second touch with her.
Yeah.
And then when it came out to race, in a listed race a week before the Blue Diamond, I was so impressed with its performance. What a tough animal it was. And I rang up the trainer, Rick Lacey, to see what he was going to do with the horse, because obviously he wasn't going to back him up in the Blue Diamond. Couldn't be possible. Sure enough, he said, I'm running him next Saturday in the Blue Diamond. He was some tough horse, that horse. He could cop anything, really. You could break bricks on him.
Yeah.
Anyway, but a kind horse in every other way. Just tough. Tough competitor. And he ran him, and the rest is history.
He won, yeah. Did you make any advances after the Blue Diamond or anything?
I was around.
Right, so you hadn't. You just
he races horses on his own, essentially, Mr. Yassine.
Okay.
And I didn't want to make a pest of myself.
Yes. Okay.
But I stayed within cooey of the horse and the trainer, etc. I was in France with a friend of mine, Alan Jones.
Yep.
And had another mate of ours, John Lever, there, and we owned a lot of the horses together, a few of the horses together, you know, and Miss Finland, for example, is owned 3 ways. And John Lever said, I'm not staying up for the Caulfield Guineas. I said, we're staying up. We're not going to miss this. And we got someone in the office to put it on the phone, you know, and so we heard it.
Yep. Couldn't see it, just heard it.
Yeah, it was a weekend, obviously, but I got one of the kids in the office that said, look, I'm going to be calling you at this time.
Yeah.
I got put the phone near the radio and let me listen to this. Anyway,
Different
it got
world
up
back then.
and I turned around and I said, mate, I'm going home to buy this thing. I can't take any more of it.
Yeah.
You know, we were destined to have it, right?
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. We're destined to have it. We're underbidders on the mare. We got the service for the client, and people thought we were crazy, of course, because we already had Danzero and Flying Spur. What do you want a third by the same sire? But you can't have too much of a good thing. Remember that one?
Yeah. And did you anticipate how successful Redoute's would be, or
no? Well, he had everything. He had speed. He had tenacity. He had a very laid-back attitude generally, so he never expended any energy before races. He had a lot of things going for him, and he was a physical Adonis. when I saw this, I thought, well, that's it. I just, he's won the Blue Diamond on his second start a week after his first. He's won the Caulfield Guineas in a good field where he was in a hopeless situation, gone. That was just pure guts there. And I thought, and he's got a pedigree from heaven.
Yeah.
So that was enough for me.